Meera Jaiswal, the elegant Indian housewife admired by her Los Angeles neighbors, and Aditya Malhotra, the charming 22-year-old son of her closest friend, shared a dangerous secret, one that began with stolen glances and ended with a brutal murder that shocked their quiet suburban street. Meera Jaiswal's life looked flawless from the outside, the kind of life that neighbors admired and relatives envied. She lived in a spacious two-story home in a calm Los Angeles suburb, surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns, blooming gardens, and quiet streets, where the most exciting event was a weekend barbecue. Her husband, Rajiv, was a successful businessman who often traveled for work, flying to different cities and even other countries. His income kept the house filled with expensive furniture, fine silk curtains from India, and delicate porcelain tea sets she barely used. Meera played the role of the perfect housewife with precision, hosting dinners, attending community functions, and being the friendly face everyone recognized. Yet behind her graceful smile was an emptiness she could not escape. She had grown used to Rajiv's absences, but lately the long stretches alone had started to weigh on her more heavily. In the mornings she would sip tea by the large bay window, watching the street as sunlight spilled across the pavement. Her days were filled with routines: morning walks, grocery shopping, cooking elaborate meals for one, and endless hours of silence. The house, though beautiful, felt like a well-decorated cage. The laughter and companionship she had once imagined when she married Rajiv had slowly faded, replaced by a lingering sense of invisibility. Across the street, life seemed lovelier. The Malhotra family's home was always buzzing with visitors, music, and the scent of home-cooked meals. Meera often exchanged pleasantries with Priya Malhotra, a cheerful woman in her late 40s who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. Priya's son, Aditya, had been away at college for the past few years, but his return for summer break brought a fresh energy to the otherwise sleepy street. Meera noticed him on the first morning he was back, tall, lean, and confident, with a relaxed smile and the kind of casual charm that drew attention effortlessly. At first, their interactions were nothing more than polite greetings. Aditya would wave as he jogged past her house in the mornings, and she would smile back from her garden. But there was a spark in his eyes that lingered a second too long, a subtle curiosity that Meera felt but pretended not to notice. She told herself it was harmless, just the friendly warmth of someone raised in a tight-knit community. Still, she found herself looking forward to his morning runs, her gaze drifting toward the street whenever she heard footsteps outside. One afternoon, while she was trimming roses in her front yard, Aditya came over to return a gardening tool Priya had borrowed weeks earlier. They spoke briefly about the weather, the neighborhood, and his college life, but there was an unspoken undertone in the air, something that made her heart race just a little faster than it should have. After that day, their paths began to cross more often. She would see him walking his dog, chatting with neighbors, or sitting in his driveway working on what he said was an art project for the summer. Meera's quiet days began to shift. She lingered outside longer than usual, timing her errands so she might bump into him. It wasn't that she was seeking anything serious, at least. That's what she told herself. It was simply the thrill of being noticed, of feeling a connection that cut through the monotony of her life. The street that had once been background scenery now felt alive, holding a secret she could barely admit, even to herself. In the stillness of the night, as the city lights glowed faintly in the distance, Meera would lie awake, replaying their brief encounters in her mind. Rajiv's voice over the phone, discussing meetings and deadlines, felt distant and hollow compared to the unspoken energy she felt with Aditya. She didn't know where this undercurrent was leading, but she sensed that something had begun to shift in her life, something that could not be undone. The perfect image she had built for years was still intact, but beneath it, cracks had started to form, quiet and invisible for now, yet capable of shattering everything if pushed too far. Aditya's return to the neighborhood seemed to bring a subtle change in Meera's world, a change she both resisted and welcomed. In the beginning it was all casual and innocent, short conversations about the weather, the occasional wave when he passed by, and small exchanges that seemed harmless. But slowly, those moments began to stretch, their encounters becoming more deliberate than accidental. On afternoons when Meera Malhotra was out running errands, Aditya would find reasons to be outside when Meera was tending to her garden or walking to her mailbox. It was never planned out loud, yet they seemed to fall into an unspoken rhythm of meeting each other. He began telling her about his art projects, sketchbooks filled with half-finished portraits, and sculptures that needed polishing. Meera, curious and eager for a distraction from her lonely days, offered to help. She told herself it was just kindness, neighborly goodwill, but the truth was that she was drawn to him, his energy, his youth, his attention. The conversations became more personal. He spoke about his struggles adjusting back home after the freedom of college life, while she found herself revealing small details about her own frustrations, things she had never said aloud to anyone before. The first time she visited his home while Meera was out, it was under the pretense of checking on a large art canvas he had been working on. She walked into the cool, quiet living room and noticed the scattered brushes, open sketch pads, and half-drunk cups of coffee. It was messy but alive, unlike her own pristine home where everything was in place but nothing felt warm. She spent hours there that afternoon, helping him sort paints, giving opinions on colors, and feeling the strange but intoxicating comfort of being somewhere she didn't have to play the role of the perfect wife. Their meetings became more frequent. Some afternoons, he would walk over to her house, bringing his projects for her to see. Other times she would slip across the street when she knew Meera wouldn't be home. In those stolen hours, the air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken understanding of what was happening between them. It wasn't yet physical, but it carried the weight of a dangerous secret. Meera, though friendly as always, began to notice the closeness. She found Aditya in conversations with Meera more often than with anyone else in the neighborhood. Once returning home earlier than expected, she saw Meera leaving her driveway and sensed something unusual. She didn't say anything at first, but her eyes lingered on her son in a way that suggested suspicion. Aditya brushed off her questions, yet deep down he knew that the more time he spent with Meera, the harder it would be to keep this hidden. Meera's own household remained oblivious. Rajiv's work schedule kept him away most of the time, and when he was home, he was buried in phone calls and meetings. The distance between them had grown so wide that even if he noticed a change in her behavior, he likely wouldn't question. She had become skilled at maintaining appearances, smiling during community gatherings, keeping the house in perfect order, and preparing elaborate meals that only she ended up eating alone. Still at night she found herself lying awake, her thoughts drifting to Aditya. She wondered if he thought about her when they weren't together, if he noticed the small ways she lingered in their conversations, stretching moments just a little longer. She told herself this was harmless, a fleeting distraction, but in her heart, she knew it was. There was a thrill in keeping it hidden, in knowing that they were crossing an invisible line, and yet she also knew that lines, once crossed, were rarely easy to step back from. The secret was no longer just an idea, it was alive, growing between them with every stolen glance and every shared moment, quietly pushing them toward a point where there would be no turning back. The night it happened began like any other, calm and uneventful, with the faint hum of distant traffic drifting into the quiet Los Angeles street. Meera had been restless all day, waiting for the moment when she could slip away to meet Aditya. The summer heat lingered even after sunset, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if it carried the weight of something about to go wrong. She had no idea that Rajiv was returning home that night, his business trip cut short without warning. His flight had landed hours earlier, and instead of calling ahead, he decided to surprise her, imagining her face lighting up when he walked through the door. When Rajiv stepped inside, the house was unusually quiet. The faint scent of her perfume hung in the air, and the lights in the living room were dim. He called out for her but heard nothing. Moving through the house, he noticed subtle things that didn't sit right: an extra glass on the kitchen counter, the sliding door to the backyard slightly ajar. Upstairs in their bedroom, the neatly made bed was disturbed, the kind of mess that suggested recent use. His pulse quickened. He called her name again, louder this time, his voice edged with suspicion. Meera, who had been in the backyard waiting for Aditya, froze when she heard his voice. Her heart raced as she tried to think of an explanation, but before she could move, she saw a figure approaching in the dark. Aditya had arrived, climbing over the low-side fence like he had done before, unaware that Rajiv was home. In that instant, everything spiraled out of control. Rajiv stepped outside, his eyes falling on the young man standing near his wife. The shock was immediate, followed by an eruption of anger that tore through the quiet night. Rajiv stormed toward Aditya, demanding to know why he was there. His voice grew louder, his movements more aggressive. The two men closed the distance quickly, their words turning into shoves, the shoves into blows. Meera stood frozen at first, her mind caught between panic and disbelief, but as the struggle grew more violent, something inside her shifted. She saw Rajiv's hand gripping Aditya's shirt, his other arm pulling back as if ready to strike harder. Fear gripped her, not for herself, but for the man she had pulled into this mess. Her eyes darted to the heavy metal sculpture on the patio table, a decorative piece Rajiv had bought from an art fair years ago. Without thinking, she grabbed it. The weight was solid, cold against her palms. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, raising it higher than she thought she could. In one swift, desperate motion, she brought it down. The sound was dull but final. Rajiv staggered, his grip loosening, his body collapsing onto the stone tiles with a sickening thud. The air went silent except for the sound of Meera's rapid breathing. Aditya stared at Rajiv's motionless form, his expression frozen in shock. Neither of them spoke, but the reality of what had just happened pressed down like a physical force. The man who had once been her husband, her provider, and her partner, now lay lifeless at her feet. The patio lights cast long shadows across his body, making the scene look almost unreal. Meera's hands trembled as she dropped the sculpture, its metal surface smeared with dark stain. Her mind raced, already leaping ahead to what would come next. The questions, the police, the scandal. Aditya bent down, checking for any sign of life, but it was clear there was none. In that moment, they both understood there was no way to undo what had been done. The night had crossed a line from which there was no return. What had begun as a secret thrill between them had transformed in the space of minutes into something irreversible, dangerous, and deadly. The hours that followed felt like a blur, yet every detail etched itself into Meera's mind as if branded there permanently. The first instinct that surged through her was to call for help, to pretend it had been an accident or an act of self-defense. But as she looked at Aditya's pale face, she knew that path would ruin them both. The scandal alone would destroy her reputation, shatter her family's name back in India, and expose the affair she had worked so hard to hide. Aditya would face prison, and Priya would never forgive her. The thought of police lights flashing outside their pristine homes made her chest tighten. They had to make it disappear. Aditya hesitated, pacing in short, restless steps, but Meera's voice was steady when she told him they had no choice. She instructed him to help move Rajiv's body. The weight of it was far heavier than she expected, awkward and unyielding as they struggled to lift him. His lifeless form felt surreal in her hands, the warmth already beginning to fade. They dragged him across the patio, leaving faint smears on the tiles, and into the garage. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the sharp smell of oil and gasoline. Inside the garage, they unrolled an old carpet Rajiv had stored for years. It was thick, dusty, and large enough to wrap him completely. As they worked, Meera's mind darted between panic and calculation. Every sound, the creak of the garage door, the distant bark of a dog, made her fear someone would notice. Once the body was wrapped, they loaded it into the trunk of Rajiv's own car. The thud when they shut the lid felt like a point of no return. They knew they couldn't keep the car at the house. Just before dawn, they set out toward the Angeles National Forest, the roads nearly empty at that hour. Meera drove, her grip tight on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the endless black ribbon of highway ahead. Aditya sat in silence, his gaze locked on the dark outlines of trees as they passed. Neither spoke about what had happened, They didn't need to. The weight in the trunk said everything. When they reached a secluded dirt path deep within the forest, the air was colder there, the silence broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. Together they pulled the carpet-wrapped body from the trunk, their breaths visible in the dim light of early morning. They carried him a short distance from the road, the ground soft underfoot, with fallen leaves and pine needles. In a shallow dip in the terrain, they laid him down, covering the shape with layers of leaves, branches and dirt, until it looked like just another patch of forest floor. Back at the house, they worked quickly to erase any signs of what had happened. Meera scrubbed the patio tiles until her arms ached, while Aditya disposed of the metal sculpture in a construction dumpster miles away. They washed their clothes separately, each load drowned in bleach. Meera vacuumed the carport, wiped down doorknobs, and sprayed air freshener to mask the metallic tang that lingered in the garage. For the first 2 days it seemed their plan might work. When neighbors asked about Rajiv, Meera calmly explained that he had left early for another business trip. She even sent herself a text from his phone to make it seem as though he was checking in. But cracks in their cover began to form almost immediately. Rajiv's business partners were surprised by his sudden departure without notice. Calls to his phone went unanswered. His absence from scheduled meetings raised alarms. By the end of the week, concern turned into suspicion. A missing persons report was filed, and detectives began quietly visiting the neighborhood. Every knock on the door sent a fresh wave of dread through Meera. The carefully constructed facade of control was slipping, and though she kept her voice steady when speaking to others, she could feel the truth lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment it would break free. Detective Laura Greene was assigned to the case within hours of the missing persons report. Known for her meticulous attention to detail, she began by retracing Rajiv's last known movements. The timeline made little sense. According to Meera, Rajiv had left early for a business trip, but there were no flight bookings under his name, no hotel reservations, and no recorded phone calls to his associates on the day he supposedly traveled. That inconsistency was enough for Greene to dig deep. The first real break came from a neighbor's security camera. Positioned high on a garage, it faced the street and caught the comings and goings of several houses, including the Jaiswal. On the night Rajiv vanished, the footage showed Aditya arriving at Meera's home late in the evening, staying for over an hour, and leaving just before dawn. What stood out even more was the sight of Rajiv's car leaving the driveway at an odd hour, with its brake lights briefly flaring before disappearing into the night. Greene requested additional camera footage from other homes along the route toward the Angeles National Forest. The grainy images weren't perfect, but one camera captured a vehicle matching Rajiv's entering a remote area in the early morning, with 2 figures inside. That was enough to secure a search warrant. When investigators combed through the forest, they focused on areas where the ground appeared recently disturbed. After hours of searching, they found the shallow covering of leaves and branches. The moment the body was uncovered, the quiet of the woods was replaced with the grim murmurs of the forensic team. The autopsy confirmed blunt force trauma to the head, and the wound's shape was consistent with a heavy curved object, something like a decorative metal sculpture. Back in the neighborhood, officers canvassed for more information. One resident recalled seeing Meera scrubbing her patio in the early hours a few days after Rajiv's disappearance. Another remembered a construction dumpster being emptied, unusually late at night, which matched the time frame when the sculpture could have been disposed of. Small details began stacking against her, each one tightening the net. The real turning point came when phone records were analyzed. Aditya's and Meera's cell phones had both pinged off the same remote cell tower in the forest on the morning Rajiv disappeared. This, combined with the security footage, created a timeline that was impossible for either of them to explain away. Detective Greene brought Aditya in. Under the pressure of questioning, his confident demeanor cracked. At first he insisted he knew nothing, but the evidence was too strong. After hours of silence and head-in-hands pauses, he finally admitted to being there that night. He tried to shift the blame entirely to Meera, claiming she had acted alone in striking Rajiv, but his own role in helping to hide the body was undeniable. When Greene confronted Meera, she maintained her composure longer than Aditya. She repeated the story about the business trip, claimed she hadn't seen Rajiv leave, and insisted any connection with Aditya was innocent. But when shown the security footage and the phone location data, her calm began to fray. A flicker of panic crossed her face, a tell Greene recognized as the moment someone realizes the truth can no longer be concealed. Within weeks both Meera and Aditya were charged, Meera with murder and Aditya as an accessory after the fact. The trial drew attention from the local community and beyond, not only because of the brutal nature of the crime, but because of the scandalous affair that had preceded it. The verdict came swiftly. Meera was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Aditya received a lengthy sentence for his role in covering up the crime. Aditya Malhotra never visited her son again, the betrayal too deep to forgive. The once quiet street in Los Angeles became a grim reminder of how quickly desire could turn to destruction, and how a single night could unravel everything built over years. The perfect life Meera had so carefully maintained had collapsed into ashes, leaving behind nothing but whispered stories of love, betrayal and murder.